Alright, welcome back to That's So Second Millennium, episode 58. This is an emergency episode. This is Paul Geesting. Bill and I had a couple of episodes recorded. Zencastr ate them. I've got about 2 minutes of my side of the audio on the first one, and I think 3 minutes on the other one out of a 20 to 30 minute episode. So here I am. I'm going to go through here and summarize what we talked about. I don't anticipate Zencastr is going to be able to get the content back. If it does, I'll definitely post it, in whether as main episodes or in some other capacity. Start out with, though, a little bit of news. First of all, I turned 40 recently. That's interesting. Another one of those moments in life I tend to... I'm a bit of a numerologist by instinct myself, so these big milestone birthdays seem to mark... things in my life. My mother passed away 2 days before I turned 30. I don't think, I've never thought that was quite a coincidence. I mean, her life was between her and God, but God can slide timing around. He has that much power. He's on the outside. He can do what he wants with it. That was a wake up call to me, and 40 has been another opportunity to make some changes. Of course, I started this podcast last year. That was a change in itself. Other changes going on in my life. If you read the blog entries, you'll hear about those in a little bit more detail than I've been doing in the podcast. Looking for work at this point. Trying to do a bit of a turn toward. Trying to use that math and science ability that I was born with, and from the time I was very, very young, realized that was what I had to. That was the most unusual thing that I had to offer the world. So would love to hear any feedback. Any of you, especially if you're involved in fields like material science. That's what I'm thinking about trying to pivot to from geology, mineralogy, crystal structures. Trying to pivot to more of an applied field. Probably a job at a national lab or something along those lines. But whatever capacity, trying to get into a place where I work with a group of people. I've spent enough of my life by myself is kind of how I feel about it. The more peers I have to bounce ideas off of, the better. So let me, in the context of this being an actual episode of That's So Second Millennium, let me go ahead and summarize what we were going to try to talk about over the next few episodes. So, Starting from what we talked about last episode, just trying to get back to basics in terms of why is it better to be Catholic than otherwise? Why is it better to be a believing scientist than otherwise? That's on both sides, right? That's kind of the whole point of the podcast, is not to make the errors that characterize the end of the second millennium that, of course, we've carried so far. It's only 20 years into the new millennium. I maintain hope that we'll get better at this, but not to try to separate science and religion, because usually that's either religious people trying to distance themselves from overly crude scientific people, or scientific people trying to distance themselves from overly crude religious people, and both of those are overreactions. It's a classic human overreaction. So let's look at it for a second from the perspective of, of course, and it's my own personal issue with the way the debate usually gets phrased, that we tend to believe that we already know where the boundaries are between science and religion. I don't think we know any such thing with anywhere near the degree of security that a lot of people seem to assume that they know where those boundaries should be. I think we're going to find out. I think we're going to continue to find out. And I think we're going to continue to find things that surprise us. I'm wading my way through the terrifying book that is Roger Penrose's Road to Reality, where he just, it's like being beaten with an aluminum baseball bat, really, in terms of, he just takes, he starts with a journey through mathematics, and now he's continuing into a journey through physics, where he simply, every chapter, he hits me in the head again. This is whether it's calculus, complex numbers, vectors, he just does it, never, the chapter, I'm in chapter 19, so we're looking at Maxwell's equations. Never once are you going to see Maxwell's equations as they're presented to you in a in a undergraduate, or even graduate level physics textbook. Does not look like what I saw in electricity and magnetism at all. It's got to be in this much more abstract and bizarre formulation. So following him along, I mean, really, all I'm doing with this is just getting myself familiar with, like, oh, this is a concept I would need to learn about in order to get to the boundary in terms of theoretical physics. Okay, and this concept, and this concept, and this concept. Now, I'm not going to learn anything from this book other than the names of the concepts. But in any case, it's still a great demonstration of just how bizarre reality actually is, and how little we have the ability to predict it beforehand. This universe that we inhabit is a very, very, very strange place indeed, compared to what our instincts... And that's the marvelous thing, on the other hand, not to go too far. We don't know nothing. We found out all manner of things. By being very careful and criticizing ourselves and one another, criticizing in the constructive sense, testing, tapping, considering, taking other people's ideas and preference to our own when they actually work better. Things that we can do with difficulty. So all of that said, based on what we do have in terms of scientific... It's, all of the dramatic things. We've talked about this in the podcast already. It's a dramatic, strange thing that turned up in the 20th century, that it turned out that determinism is not really a viable option. And all the tests of Bell's inequality are really kind of have just driven a final nail into that coffin. The universe is not deterministic. It's not, what we think, among other things, is not physically determined by the prior state of the system. That's simply not true. There is all the room in the world that we need for non-material things that we couldn't tell. The universe has been constructed not to be able to let us tell. It may as well, that's not a proof that it is the teleology of what I just said. There's no proof of that. But if something had constructed a universe in order not to be able to tell when non-material things affected the material universe, it could look something like this. It could look exactly like this. So, and also the fact that the universe has a cause, or at least it seems to have a beginning. And, we have this endless chains of causality, and they have to end somewhere, or else the chain could never get started. That's a philosophic point that seems it's hard to get around. There has to be some sort of cause. We need a beginning. We need a cause that is not itself caused, which means it's not going to look like anything in the universe itself. We all have minds. We all know that we think, and we know that we experience, and those are not the same things as knowing that this green light entering my eyes from the grass outside is at X nanometer wavelength. That's nice. That's fascinating. That's wonderful to know. And to know that it starts and generates neural patterns of chemical and electrical signaling through my brain. That's all fascinating to know. It's very important to know. And in fact, it will tell us more about our thought processes. That, I think, gets underrated by some philosophers, so to speak, on our side in terms of being religious. We have a lot to learn from neuroscience. We've started talking about that a little bit. But that still doesn't mean that we can reduce things. We just can't. We can't reduce it all to matter. There's something that's obviously not simply matter. And the only argument the materialists have is simply to shuffle their feet and assert the dogma that, well, it must be all physical, because that's worked so well so far. Well, yeah, it's true that, we've come up with a lot of material explanations for an awful lot of things. That's no guarantee whatever that they're going to end. Finding deterministic explanations for things came to an end. And then, of course, there's the fact, and then we move on from the idea that there is something beyond the universe. There is a first cause, a being itself, a prime mover. All of those things are true, predicated of that thing that created the universe. And then we have, we have our own spiritual component. And then we move on to the question of, what is this thing trying to tell us in terms of what has happened in the world, the history of Christianity itself, the resurrection of Jesus, not what happens to a guru, not what happens to a warlord. The story of Jesus Christ is it's just not like all of those things. It's not a mythology. It has names and dates attached to it. And then, of course, there's the fact that miracles have continued to occur. And in fact, in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, we continue to have things that simply don't, they either don't make sense or they're so amazingly unlikely. Things that, why do we have a professional medical board in Lourdes testing miracles? What actually happened at Fatima? What is this Shroud of Turin that would have taken... Gosh, I was reading a fascinating article about that. How many gigawatts of laser output you would need in order to burn the pattern into the Shroud of Turin fast enough so that the fibers wouldn't degrade. I mean, it's just insane. It's just insane. And the healings that go on elsewhere in the world. If you've ever read, I'll put his name in the liner notes, but Bob Schuchts has written a few fascinating books. I mean, he's, one of us. German-American, his last name is horrible to spell in the classic German fashion, Schuchts. But, and then he's gone to the third world and encountered, people with enough faith that the healings actually still happen. I have to take his word for it, but that's simply not the entirety of the story. Even if that was proved wrong, even if every story that he had a natural explanation, there's just too much. There's just too much. I mean, there's certainly too much for Christianity as a worldview to be dismissed. There's far too much for that. That's not even an option that's on the table. And yet that's what our culture screams at us. And that's what's truly asinine. And that has, and that's again, one of the things that I look at the history of the last 500 years of Western civilization and look at, the church is still being punished for the hypocrisy of its leadership, for the hypocrisy of the political leadership that it allied itself with. And what are we going to do about that in this third millennium? I think we ought to take some really careful, we as the laity specifically, and that step is not going to be rebellion against the clergy and attempt to replace it. But it's like, what are we going to do? The church needs probably to operate differently in order to spread the message of this amazing Jesus of Nazareth and to make people's lives better, or to be the instrument by which God makes people's lives better. And there's just... there's no room for complacency. Why would we want to be complacent? We have this amazing mission we could be part of. Why do we sit on the sidelines and, shop for crap on the internet? Of course, he said, thinking of something that he spent a lot of time doing himself. So, and that brings me kind of to the other half of what I was hoping to talk about in the next few episodes. We are, to talk about, and of course this is, a topic I want to take up in the rest of the season, perhaps. But, and so I've brought up the whole intellectual side, and I was listening to a couple of podcasts, where this guy named, Protestant apologist named John Warner Wallace was being interviewed. He was the LAPD homicide officer. He comes with a sort of forensic background and, looking at all the alternatives specifically for how could you explain the resurrection of Jesus without a supernatural event happening. None of them are anything you'd want to bring in front of a jury. None of them are anything you'd want to bring in front of a jury. And so he comments, actually, specifically, a point that stuck with me. He said, my life is more difficult now that I've found Jesus. I just have to do it because it's true. And I'm like, well, that's really admirable. I'm glad that he's doing that. But there's another side to it in terms of, if it's all true, the New Testament doesn't promise us an easy life, and yet it does promise us blessing. So I hope that, I hope that's not all there is for him to experience. I suspect it's not. So it's important to be intellectually honest about things. One point that he brought up, there's certain people, and he brought up Mormons specifically, and I've had the Mormon sales pitch, or at least a Mormon sales pitch that sounds like the one that was, given to him. Pick up this book and read it and think about how it makes you feel. Well, we don't start with feelings. A lot of people say, well, we shouldn't do feelings at all, and I'm not sure that works. That was a point that Bill and I were discussing. You have to take feelings into account. They're an integral part of who we are. And I can vouch for having spent decades trying to hammer my feelings into oblivion. It didn't work very well. It didn't lead to a life that was very successful in terms of growing in virtue. It didn't lead to a life that was very successful in terms of doing much good for other people. It's really, it hasn't worked. You don't, that's a far, acknowledging that you have feelings and taking steps recognizing to live in a way that recognizes that you have feelings, those are important. Those are really important. That's a far cry from doing whatever your feelings seem to impel you to do at the moment. Those are very, very different things. So we get to, now, if this is all true, if intellectually this stuff is all true, we will get to the point where we get help in terms of things like dealing with our feelings, being able to live through the pain that we experience, able to live through disappointments, being able to live through and actually grow past and come to a better emotional state. I mean, sometimes we really will feel better as a result of this God that we've come to believe in acting in our lives. That is, I mean, that's simply going to happen if all the rest of it is true, because it's all, by the time you've taken the entirety of the Christian scriptures and Catholic tradition, that's in there. That's in there. That's incorporated. That's not, you can't wish that away. So thinking about what are the sort of practical benefits? I came up with a list, so I'll go ahead and sketch these out, and then I have some interesting news to share with you here at the end. So, Christianity provides a shockingly direct answer to the question of evil that seems to me really underappreciated. I'm having trouble thinking of someone. I'm sure I've read or heard someone make this statement before, but not often enough. The fact that we don't have an explicit, we have an implicit answer, but we have a fascinatingly powerful implicit answer to the question of evil, which is that God, and not just a God, a super being, that's not an old man sitting on a chair in the clouds, that's not who we believe in. That's not the God of actual Christianity. Being itself, the transcendental God of both, sorry Pascal, of both Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the philosophers, all at once, all at the same time. I am who am. That God has emptied himself, become man, become born in a stable, become a refugee, lived in poverty in an oppressed corner of an ancient empire, lived in a probably, listening especially to the bits and pieces from, say, the Gospel of John, where Jesus' brothers don't really believe in him either, in a, mixed family of some kind, some sort of tension, whether St. Joseph had children from a previous marriage or not, depending on whose interpretation of the Holy Family's history you follow. In any case, whether they were half-brothers or cousins, Jesus had a lot of people, and of course he went back to Nazareth and had lots of people disbelieve in him, and in fact try to throw him off of the edge of the hill they had apparently built the town on. So Jesus went through all of that, started a movement, healed a bunch of people, and then submitted himself to interrogation, torture, and even to this day, one of the worst forms of death that the human race has ever devised. There are worse lives than Jesus of Nazareth. There are people who've suffered more than him. But he went right out into the middle of it. And so God has, as it were, put his money where his mouth is. We don't know what the value of evil is. I mean, we don't have a firm answer to that. We have lots of theories. And we also have the assurance that which put us here has experienced evil too, and quite a bit of it. Why does Christianity continue to spread in poor nations? Why does it spread in China? It spreads in Africa. It's spreading in Asia. It continues to this day to spread in these places. And in China, in the face of a really, an amazingly oppressive government, with all the modern apparatus of modern technology at its service, all of it. Hell, they manufacture all of it. Well, how is it spreading? Why is it spreading? Why is it it's so demanding, and yet it answers human needs. That's the answer. It answers human needs, and we are in the West trying to escape from it, and we have in the middle of amazing plenty, material wealth beyond the imagination of previous generations. We're miserable, and we're bitching at each other, and we have nothing better to do than be miserable and bitch at each other. Why? And drown ourselves in distractions, of course. All the things that disappoint us, we drown in distractions. Why are we so... Why have we drifted away? Why are we so... that's the central question. That's the fascinating drama of the last 500 years of human history, is that even as Europe was destroying Christianity from within, it was spreading it to the whole rest of the world. It's just fascinating and bizarre, and I don't know what the answer is, why God has chosen to do it this way. Obviously. Obviously. But we've passed. We're most of the way through. We're almost all the way through. One phase. Going from one phase into the next. If this is the sound of me leaning over while I plug in my laptop, which is going to die otherwise. Yeah. We're going from one phase to the next, and we shouldn't necessarily. We shouldn't lament too much the passing of what was gone, because there's the possibility of much, much better things. A church that is actually unmoored from the political establishment. And it's actually beautiful how even in the medieval era, the church managed to maintain a certain distance. And that's, of course, it was necessary. It was how it formed, it was how it continued, and it's how it's going to continue into this third millennium without any further political patronage, as in fact governments turn against it in various ways. It's fascinating. It's also going to be dangerous. The possibility that our own governments in the West will reach the point. They have. There's been Spain and France and Russia and Mexico and innumerable cases where the Catholic Church has basically become illegal, or the Christian churches have basically become illegal, and people have been killed for refusing to toe the secular line. And we're actually in a lull. We'll see if it comes back. I mentioned our tendency to drug away the pain that we experience having thrown away Christianity. With all of our distractions and our chemical distractions and our various ways of adjusting our internal chemistry. So that's almost the characteristic failing of our age. There are people who interpret, there's Gerald May, his book Addiction and Grace from back in the 80s, still an extremely powerful book worth reading. I think he goes too far in terms of interpreting every habit as an addiction. He saw addiction everywhere. Not every habit is an addiction, but an awful lot of them are. And the model of addiction describes an awful lot of sin. Not just lust and gluttony and even avarice, but even sloth and pride and envy in a way, or anger. All of them can be addictive. And all of their subparts, all of the pieces of those capital sins. So addiction is fascinating because, of course, it's evoked this response in the form of the 12 steps, which have spread, all over the place. From a couple of drunks in Ohio and New York. And the 12 steps are so countercultural. And again, this is something I mentioned in a blog post earlier this year. But, the steps, if you take apart the steps and look at them, I mean, and they're offered to everybody, and they should be offered to everybody, because after all, we're all human beings. But my God, they're Christian. They are amazing, and they're Catholic. They're not sola fides. They are definitely not, hard predestination. They're the entirety of the Christian message in terms of the moral life, the human life. You need grace. You're going to fail without it. But you have to be willing to act on the grace once it's offered to you. And you have to be willing to confess your sins and do something about it. And then turn around and ask for more help in order to do it less, to grow in virtue, to do the opposite, and to help one another. You need help to do all of those things, and yet you also need the willingness to put that help into practice. That's the true golden mean of, not Pelagianism. No, we can't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Those of us who've tried, really tried, have failed miserably. And yet, we're also not passive recipients of, well, I'll just do whatever I do. No, that's not how it works either. And then there's there's the fact that the West is based on, the Greek and Roman intellectual tradition merged with the Jewish tradition into Christianity, which is, arguably, ancient Judaism split into two pieces, modern Judaism and Christianity. And Christianity then went and spread and gained, because it had changed from a ethnic religion into a religion of conversion. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, things that, simply, if you encounter this idea or this person and find it convincing, or you want to live the way that he does, then you join this religion. It's, it's not limited by blood or culture. So that merger of Greco-Roman culture, of Mediterranean culture, I should say, really more broadly, and the Jewish specific spiritual element, that then had 1,000 years to flower, and flower it did, and brought us, and see, that's the thing, of course, we live with that. Protestantism plays into this, then secularism takes that and takes it further. The attempt to forget our past, the attempt to forget that we got all these ideas. All of the ideas. What idea in progressivism is not either a conscious attempt to thumb its nose at Christianity, or else an unconscious continuation of a theme that was present in the Christian synthesis, in Christendom, so to speak, in the High Middle Ages? What doesn't fall into one of those two categories? And we have this enormous storehouse of intellectual structure, robust philosophical realism, the best out there. An enormous storehouse of moral philosophy. An enormous storehouse, really, of psychological insight. And yet we force ourselves, Western scholars are forcing themselves to do it all over again. To pretend that it hasn't been done. Well, and to live in, and then of course, we're far past the point where we have actually deprived generation after generation of the knowledge that all of this has been done before. There are already very creditable attempts to be, and not to be taken, it's not like medieval psychology needs to be taken lock, stock, and barrel. Or any, I'm not trying to make any such claim as that, but it's been thought about, and the details are worth studying, and the ones that work should be kept. It should all be tested, but some of it's going to work, and a lot of it's going to inspire better ideas than the stuff we're ham-fisting around. The whole saga of 20th century psychology and Freudianism and Jungianism, it's not as bad as it could be, but certainly has its drawbacks, that's for sure. And then behaviorism, oh my gosh. That's materialist reductionism, applied to deliberately destroy human life, practically. Yeah. So why do we as Catholics slave along as intellectual second or third class citizens in the modern world? And it's gone. It's amazing how, how that voice has been silenced and put in the corner, as the saying goes. That everything has to be put through this filter of progressivism. Everything, our whole culture, the whole establishment of publishing, of movie making, of television. And we're blessed to live in this age where we have such access through the internet, that we can at least, we have the opportunity, we have ground where we can create countercultural things. And people are doing that. The Unplanned movie, the movie about Kermit Gosnell, are just the two examples that come most immediately to my mind. Somehow the Passion of the Christ got made. As whatever you think about Mel Gibson, that was a beautiful film, a beautiful meditation and film of the Passion. These things slip out, but yeah, the machinery for it is so, how has it been ground this far into the ground? And what do we need to do in the face of it? We need to push back. All of us who have anything to say, we should talk to each other. We should try to be organized about it. That'd probably help. But we have so much good to say. And of course, it'll be a lot more convincing if we do the good that suggests, too. All right, well, this is going to be a full-length episode, isn't it? Well, thanks for soldiering on with me in Bill's absence. I hope there's been something valuable in that. As always, we would love to get your feedback. You few, you brave, you proud, or subscribe to us and support us. Continue downloading and listening to the podcast. We're really grateful. Please leave us a review. Please give us feedback. You can email us at the links on the website. That's SoSecondMillennium.net. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk to you. Some interesting news, like I promised. We are in talks about providing sort of coverage of the Society of Catholic Scientists conference, just as another form of media outlet. So they have videos, or release them on the website. We're going to try to promote this podcast and get it in front of more people. There's just so much to do. This is, I'm a self-taught amateur at all of this. And of course, I'm the young one, so I get to do the technical stuff. Bill is trying to make a living as a freelance journalist, which is a little busy, as you can imagine. So, yeah, I'm trying to do this my own, all the production and that sort of value and the social media aspect of it. So it's been very, very slow in terms of improving our social media engagement, trying to interact with people out there and get better ideas. But we hope that we can do something to help out the Society of Catholic Scientists, because that mission is one of the many things that we need to have people be visibly Catholic and Christian, and for that matter, Muslim, Jewish, and Buddhist, believing, not culturally and laissez-faire. That's not really the term, but pick and choose as you please. Type of actual religious people, but people who religion actually shapes their life rather than it simply being a sort of, decoration in a few small parts of their life. We need more of that too. So we hope to be able to support that mission. All right. Well, thanks again, and tune in next time.